The estate did not look real when Sarah first saw it. It rose behind iron gates and stone walls, like something pulled from a dream, built on money and power and secrets. The car ride there had been silent, except for the soft breathing of Marco asleep in the back seat, and the steady presence of the driver who never spoke, unless spoken to. Sarah told herself she was only here for the baby. She repeated it like a prayer as the gates opened, and the car rolled forward. Only for Marco. Inside the house, everything was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that came from control, not peace. Marble floors reflected soft light, and every surface looked untouched, as if no one dared disturb anything. A woman in her 60s greeted her at the door. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp, but not unkind. "I am Teresa," she said. "You are expected." Expected. The word made Sarah's stomach tighten. They went upstairs to the nursery. Sarah heard the crying before she saw him. Marco was in Dominic's arms again, his face flushed, his body tense, his cries weaker than on the plane, but filled with the same desperation. "He has not eaten," Dominic said quietly. "Not since we landed." Sarah moved without thinking, her training taking over. She reached for Marco, and the moment he felt her, his cries softened. His small hands gripped her shirt as if afraid she might vanish. "He is losing weight," she said gently. "You can hear it in his cry." Dominic's jaw clenched. "The doctor says if this continues, he will need a feeding tube." The thought made Sarah's chest ache. She looked down at Marco, his eyes squeezed shut, his mouth searching blindly. He remembered. She sat in the rocking chair and fed him. Again, the change was immediate. Again, the room filled with silence, broken only by the quiet sounds of a baby, finally at ease. Dominic watched like a man witnessing a miracle. Hope and fear battled in his eyes. After Marco slept, Sarah pulled back, carefully covering herself. She met Dominic's gaze. "You need to know something." He nodded. "Tell me." "I cannot do this forever," she said. "I will help him stabilize. Teach him to take expressed milk. Work with a specialist. But then I need to leave." Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You can leave." "But not yet." Her heart skipped. "Why?" "Because the moment you fed my son, you became visible. Not just to me." He gestured slightly. "Other families will notice. They will ask questions. And until Marco is strong again, you're safest here." Sarah felt fear bloom in her chest. "You mean I am trapped?" "No," Dominic said firmly. "You are protected." The words should have comforted her. Instead, it felt heavy. That night, Sarah lay awake in the guest room, listening to the quiet hum of security outside the door. She thought of the plane. Of the moment she had stood up and walked into danger without understanding it. Down the hall, Dominic sat alone in the nursery, watching his son sleep. He knew the truth now. The baby was not just hungry. He had been fading slowly. Refusing bottles, losing strength. Sarah had not just soothed Marco. She had saved his life. And in Dominic Santoro's world, that kind of salvation changed everything. The change did not happen all at once. It came quietly like a shadow, stretching longer each day. By the third morning, Sarah felt it in the air. The way the guards spoke less. The way Dominic's phone never stopped vibrating. The way Teresa watched her with careful eyes that carried both warmth and warning. Marco was stronger now. His cries were no longer thin or desperate. They were sharp, healthy, demanding. Each feeding left him heavier, warmer, more alive. Sarah should have felt relief. Instead, unease settled deep in her chest. She noticed the first sign, when a man she had never seen before stood outside the nursery door. Not a guard. Not family. He wore a tailored suit and a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Who is that?" she asked Teresa softly. Someone asking questions, Teresa replied. That is never good. Later that day, Dominic closed the nursery door behind him and leaned against it. His face was calm, but his eyes were dark and alert. We need to talk, he said. Sarah's stomach tightened. About what? About you. The word landed heavy. 3 families have reached out, Dominic continued. They want to know who you are. Why my son will not eat for anyone but you. Sarah felt cold spread through her limbs. What did you tell them? That you are under my protection. The words should have reassured her. Instead, they made her feel owned. I did not agree to that, she said quietly. You agreed to keep my son alive, Dominic replied just as quietly. In my world, those 2 things cannot be separated. She stood clutching Marco to her chest. I am not part of your world. I will help him get strong, and then I will leave. Dominic stepped closer, stopping a careful distance away. You can leave. I will not stop you. But once you walk out those doors, I cannot protect you. From what? From men who see you as leverage. As power. As weakness. Sarah's voice shook. You're saying I am in danger because I helped a baby. Yes. The honesty in his voice scared her more than lies would have. That night, Sarah stood at the window of her room, watching the lights along the estate fence. She felt watched even in silence. Downstairs, Dominic met with Luca. Voices low, urgent. The Morty family is asking about her, Luca said. They are not subtle. Dominic's jaw tightened. They will not touch her. They will if they think you hesitate. Dominic did not hesitate. Not when it came to his son. Not when it came to Sarah. By morning, the truth was clear. Sarah Mitchell was no longer invisible. She was protected. She was watched. She was whispered about. And Dominic Santoro had crossed a line he could never uncross. Because the moment he claimed her under his protection, he made her his responsibility. In his world, responsibility was possession. And possession was worth killing for. The explosion came before dawn. It shook the walls hard enough to rattle the windows and throw Sarah out of bed. For one terrible second, her mind went blank, and then only one name filled it. Marco. She ran barefoot into the hall, heart hammering. Shouts echoed through the estate, alarms, screaming, red lights flashing. Somewhere glass shattered, and the smell of smoke crept into the air. The nursery door was already open. Dominic stood inside, holding Marco tight against his chest, his body positioned like a shield. His face was no longer calm. It was cold, sharp, lethal. What is happening? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. They made their move, Dominic said, without looking away from the hall. This is not random. As if summoned, Luca burst in blood, streaking his temple. Boss, it is the Mortys. 3 locations hit at once. Warehouses, docks, one of the safe houses. Sarah felt the room spin. This was because of her. Luca hesitated, then forced the words out. They left a message. They want the woman. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. Give me to them, Sarah said, before anyone could stop her. If it ends this. No, Dominic snapped, his voice cutting through the room like steel. He turned to her, eyes blazing. That is not happening. Marco whimpered, sensing the tension. Sarah reached for him, instinctively, her hands shaking. You cannot let people die because of me, she whispered. Dominic stepped closer, gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. You are not a bargaining chip. You are under my protection. Another blast echoed closer this time. The lights flickered. Luca moved fast. We need to move them now. Dominic handed Marco to Teresa, who appeared from nowhere. Safe room now. Take him. Teresa nodded, clutching the baby close, and disappeared. Dominic turned back to Sarah. Listen to me. You trust me or you die. There is no middle ground. She searched his face, seeing no doubt, only fierce resolve. She nodded. The safe room swallowed them in concrete and steel. The door sealed with a heavy mechanical thud. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. Hours dragged on. Sarah fed Marco her hands, steady even as fear screamed inside her. Gunfire thundered faintly above them. Then the power died. Darkness rushed. Teresa swore softly. They cut the grid. A deafening impact hit the door. Once. Twice. Smoke seeped through the edges. The steel groaned. Run, Teresa said, shoving Sarah toward a hidden panel. Emergency tunnel. Take the baby and go. What about you? Teresa raised her weapon. I will buy you time. Sarah did not argue. She ran. The tunnel was narrow, dark, endless. Marco cried as she stumbled forward, heart in her throat. Behind her, she heard shouting, gunfire, then silence. She burst into the woods behind the estate, cold air slamming into her lungs. Flames rose in the distance. The mansion was burning. Headlights appeared. Men poured out, moving fast, blocking her escape. Not Dominic's men. A hand grabbed her arm. The baby cried. A familiar, cold voice spoke. The wet nurse. Finally. Something sharp pressed to her face. The world went dark. And Sarah Mitchell vanished into the night with the Santoro air in her arms. Sarah woke to silence, so complete it rang in her ears. For a moment, she did not know where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory crashed back in fire smoke hands, pulling her away, Marco screaming. She sat up, gasping. Marco. He lay beside her in an ornate cradle, untouched, unharmed, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Relief nearly knocked her back onto the bed. Good, you are awake. The voice came from the shadows, smooth, calm, and cold. A man stepped into the light, older, silver hair neatly, cut, eyes sharp, with calculation. Who are you? Sarah demanded, pulling Marco closer. Vittorio Morty. You are in my home. Fear iced her veins. Where is Dominic? Alive. For now. He smiled thinly. I made sure he knew where to find you. Understanding struck. You want him here? Of course. He took everything from me. My son's my power, my name. Now I take what he loves. Sarah's heart pounded. I am nothing to him. Morty laughed softly. You feed his air. You calm him. You broke the dawn. That makes you everything. The hours that followed crawled. Sarah fed Marco, changed him, whispered comfort while guards watched. They wanted the baby healthy. Leverage had to survive. As night fell, Morty returned. He is here. They dragged her to a high window overlooking the courtyard. Floodlights snapped on. Dominic stood alone below, hands raised, unarmed. Even from a distance, Sarah felt his presence. Controlled violence, barely contained. Let them go, Dominic's voice carried. Take me. Morty laughed loudly, pushing Sarah forward. Your empire for the woman and the child. Sign it all over. Done, Dominic said without hesitation. Sarah's breath caught. He would give up everything. But Morty was not finished. I cannot let you live. You would rebuild. He pressed a gun to Sarah's head. Dominic moved faster than thought. A weapon appeared in his hand. Sarah acted at the same time. She bit down hard on Morty's wrist. The gun fired, shattering glass. Chaos erupted. Dominic's men flooded the room. Gunfire echoed. Morty stumbled. Dominic was on him in seconds. A force of fury and grief. You touched what is mine, Dominic growled. The fight ended quickly. Morty fell, broken, bleeding. Kill me, he spat. Dominic raised his gun. The monster hovered close. Dominic, Sarah said softly. He froze. Looked at her. At Marco, safe in her arms. Do not become him. The gun lowered. Take him, Dominic ordered. Let the families decide. Morty was dragged away, screaming. The room fell silent. Dominic crossed to Sarah, crushing her into his chest. I thought I lost you. She clung to him. You found us. His voice broke. I give up everything for you. She believed him. Because he already had. 6 months later, the sky over Montana stretched wide, an endless pale blue, without smoke, without sirens, without fear. The air smelled like pine and clean earth, and something new beginning. Sarah stood on the wooden porch holding Marco against her shoulder, rocking him gently. He was heavier, now warm, solid, alive, in a way that still made her chest ache with gratitude. Every breath he took felt like a miracle she refused to take for granted. Behind her, the door opened softly. Dominic stepped out, no suit, no guards, no shadow following him. Just a man in a simple shirt sleeves, rolled up carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He paused, watching them the way he always did, as if afraid the moment might vanish if he blinked. "He is asleep," Sarah whispered. Dominic smiled, the kind of smile that would have once terrified people. Now it was softer, still powerful, but no longer sharp. He crossed the porch and pressed a kiss to Marco's dark hair, then to Sarah's temple. "Every morning I wake up expecting it to be gone," he said quietly. "The noise, the danger, the blood. And every morning it is still gone," Sarah replied. They stood there together, listening to nothing but wind and birds, and the steady breathing of a child who had survived. The world they left behind had not disappeared. It had closed ranks, chosen new leaders, rewritten rules. Dominic Santoro had become a name spoken in the past tense. Some said he was dead. Others said he had vanished. Only a few knew the truth. He had walked away. The families had protested at first, threatened, tested. Then the old council spoke. The woman who fed the air was sacred. The child had lived because of compassion, not violence. And a man who chose peace over power had paid his debts in full. A document had arrived one morning, sealed in wax. Release. Freedom. Sanctioned exile. Dominic had stared at it a long time before handing it to Sarah. "It is over," he said. Now the proof stood around them in quiet acres and open sky. Sarah shifted Marco, gently feeling the familiar warmth in her chest. Dominic noticed immediately. He smiled again, softer this time. "Soon." She nodded. "Soon." Inside the house, Teresa moved about, humming lightly. She had come to visit. To stay for a while. "Family," she said, with a look that allowed no argument. Marco stirred, letting out a small sound. Sarah adjusted him instinctively. Dominic watched her with something close to awe. "You know," he said, "one day he will ask how all this started." Sarah smiled. "What will you tell him?" Dominic looked out across the land. That his mother heard him cry when no one else could. That she chose love when fear would have been easier. That she saved us both. Sarah felt tears burn, but she did not look away. The past still hurt. Emma still lived in a quiet place inside her heart. But the pain no longer owned her. Love had returned. Not replacing what was lost, but standing beside it. As the sun dipped lower, Dominic reached for her hand. "Whatever comes next," he said. "We face it together," Sarah replied. Marco shifted between them, content whole. And far away, the old world turned without them. Power changed hands. Violence fed itself. Stories were told and forgotten. But here, on this porch, under this sky, a family built not on fear or tradition, but choice, finally breathed in peace. The cry that once froze first class had changed everything. Not with power, not with violence, but with love. The first scream cut through the first-class cabin like shattered glass. It was sharp and raw and impossible to ignore, a sound that did not belong among leather seats and crystal tumblers, and the low murmur of wealthy passengers pretending not to notice anything unpleasant. Conversations faltered. A woman across the aisle flinched, her smile freezing in place. A man lowered his newspaper slowly, irritation flashing across his face before something colder replaced it. The baby screamed again. It was the kind of cry that came from deep in the chest, desperate and unfiltered, the sound of a tiny body that did not understand money or power or rules. The sound of need. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone sighed. Someone else glanced toward the flight attendant, then quickly looked away. No one said a word. Because they had all seen him. The man sat rigid in his seat, broad shoulders filling the expensive leather like it had been made for him alone. He wore a black suit tailored so perfectly it looked sculpted rather than sewn. Not a wrinkle, not a thread out of place. His dark hair was swept back with deliberate precision, and his face was all sharp angles and control, the kind of face that didn't smile unless it meant something dangerous. Dominic Santoro did not belong on a commercial flight. He belonged in whispered conversations and sealed rooms. He belonged to the shadows people crossed the street to avoid. And he was holding a screaming baby. The contrast was jarring, almost obscene. The infant's tiny fists beat weakly against Dominic's chest, his face red and wet with tears. He screamed again, louder this time, his voice cracking with exhaustion. Dominic adjusted his grip instinctively, his large hand cradling the baby's head with surprising care. His jaw tightened, the muscle ticking beneath his skin. This was a man who commanded fear without raising his voice. A man whose name could end conversations and start funerals. A man who controlled men who controlled cities. And none of it mattered. The baby did not care who his father was. The baby screamed anyway. Dominic's eyes flicked around the cabin, calculating, measuring reactions. He saw the fear there, the restrained irritation, the careful distance. He was used to that. He thrived in it. But now it only made the moment sharper, crueler. His power filled the space, heavy and undeniable, yet utterly useless against the small, shaking body in his arms. He rocked the baby gently, awkwardly, copying motions he'd seen others use. The child's cries only intensified, tiny lungs fighting for breath between sobs. Dominic leaned closer, murmuring something low in Italian, words meant for comfort, for safety. They had worked on grown men before. They did nothing now. A flight attendant approached, her professional smile tight at the edges. "Sir," she said softly, keeping her voice low, "is there anything we can do to help?" Dominic looked up and the smile almost broke. His gaze was cold, automatic, the look that made people step back without realizing why. "No," he said, calm as ever. "We are fine." The baby screamed again, as if to expose the lie. The attendant hesitated, then nodded and retreated, relief clear on her face. Around them, the cabin settled into a tense silence, everyone pretending not to listen while listening to everything. Dominic exhaled slowly through his nose. His arms ached, not from the weight of the child, but from the strain of holding himself together. 2 months ago, this baby had entered his life wrapped in blood and loss. 2 months ago, Isabella had died in his hands, her last breath stolen to give their son his first. Since then, Dominic had learned how to sign documents while holding a bottle, how to issue orders with a baby monitor clipped to his belt, how to sleep in 20-minute stretches and wake up already braced for the next cry. But this was different. This was public, exposed. There was no room to be the Dawn here, no room for threats or walls. Just a man and his child and the humiliating truth that he did not know how to fix this. The baby's screams softened into broken sobs, his small body trembling. Dominic pressed the child closer to his chest, resting his cheek briefly against the baby's dark hair. His eyes burned, but he refused to let them show it. Fear he could control, violence he understood. Helplessness was new. The infant hiccuped, his cries returning, weaker now but no less desperate. Around them, the first-class cabin felt smaller, tighter, as if the air itself was holding its breath. No one knew it yet, but this cry was about to change everything. Not because of the man holding the baby, but because somewhere nearby, someone else was listening. And unlike everyone else on that plane, she would not look away. Sarah Mitchell pressed her forehead lightly against the airplane window and closed her eyes, but the sound followed her anyway, slicing through her thoughts, refusing to let her hide. The baby was still crying. Not the sharp first scream from earlier, but a broken, uneven sound now filled with exhaustion, and the kind of cry that came when a child had already spent all his strength and had nothing left but instinct. Sarah's chest tightened painfully, her body reacted before her mind could stop it, a deep aching pull spreading through her breasts, warm and insistent milk, threatened despite the thick nursing pads she still wore 6 months later, as if her body refused to accept the truth her heart lived with every day. There was no baby waiting for her anymore. 6 months ago, she had woken up to silence, the worst kind of silence, the kind that screamed louder than any cry ever could. Emma had been so still in her crib, so cold, so impossibly quiet. The doctors had spoken softly used words like sudden and unexplained and syndrome, as if language could soften death. It had not. Sarah swallowed hard, forcing the memory down the way she had learned to do in therapy. She focused on her breathing in, out slow, steady. But the crying cut through her again, and her body betrayed her once more. She knew that cry. She had heard it in hospital rooms at 3 a.m. in the NICU, where alarms hummed and lives balanced on numbers. She had answered it without thinking for years, had trusted her hands, her instincts, her training. She had been a pediatric nurse once, before grief hollowed her out. Before walking into a ward full of babies became unbearable because hers was not there anymore. The cry sharpened, suddenly turning frantic, and something inside Sarah cracked open. She imagined the baby red-faced fists clenched, searching for something familiar, something warm, something no bottle could replace. She squeezed her eyes shut. Do not get involved, she told herself. This is not your place. You survived by learning when to look away. But her body did not agree, her heart did not agree, and the milk still came because her body remembered what her mind wished it could forget. She turned her head slowly, just enough to see down the aisle. And that was when she saw him. The man holding the baby sat several rows ahead, surrounded by empty seats, no one daring to sit too close. His posture was rigid, like a man bracing for impact. His suit was dark, expensive, perfectly cut. But it looked wrong on him, now too tight around a chest that rose and fell with controlled tension. He looked dangerous, even seated, even trapped inside a plane thousands of feet in the air. Other passengers had noticed him too, Sarah could tell, by the way eyes flicked toward him, and away again, by the way shoulders stiffened. Fear hung around him like a second skin. Yet the baby in his arms was impossibly small against that broad chest. The child cried again, and Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. She recognized the hunger in that sound, the searching, the confusion. Babies did not cry like that for attention. They cried like that when something was wrong. Her fingers curled into the armrest. Her heart pounded louder with every second. If she stood up, people would stare. If she spoke to him, she might regret it. If she offered help, she could be rejected, humiliated, or worse. But if she did nothing, she would regret that too. A flight attendant passed her row, and Sarah reached out without thinking, touching her sleeve lightly. Excuse me, she said, her voice unsteady. I am a nurse. The attendant paused, surprise flickering across her face. A nurse. Pediatric, Sarah added quickly, as if that mattered more than anything else. That baby sounds like he is starving or overwhelmed. He does not sound okay. The attendant hesitated, glancing toward the front of the cabin. The passenger with the child has declined assistance. Sarah nodded. Of course he had. She lowered her voice. I know this is unusual, but maybe I could help, just to try. The attendant studied her for a moment, taking in her pale face, the tremor in her hands, the unmistakable urgency in her eyes. Finally, she exhaled. All right, she said carefully. I will ask him. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt before she could lose her nerve. Her legs felt weak. As she stepped into the aisle, every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to sit down, to pretend she had never heard the crying at all. But she did not turn back, because grief had already taken everything from her once. And she could not walk away from another child in need. Not again. The aisle felt longer than it should have been as Sarah followed the flight attendant toward the front of the cabin. Every step made her heart beat louder, until she was sure everyone could hear it. The baby cried again, a thin, desperate sound that cut straight through her chest and pulled her forward faster despite the fear curling in her stomach. When she finally stood beside him, the world seemed to narrow to a single point. The man looked up. His eyes were dark, not just in color, but in depth, like something that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and learned never to flinch. Sarah felt the impact of his gaze like a physical force, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. Up close, his presence was overwhelming. He smelled faintly of leather, and something sharp and expensive. His face was carved with hard lines, sharp jaw, cheekbones that looked almost sculpted. His expression was controlled, but there was tension beneath it, something strained and barely held together. The baby screamed again, right between them. Sarah flinched not from the sound, but from the way the man's arms tightened instinctively around the child. He lowered his head, slightly murmuring words under his breath in a language she did not understand. His voice was low, rough, threaded with something raw. The flight attendant cleared her throat. Nervously, "Sir, this passenger says she is a pediatric nurse." She wondered if she might help. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the man looked back at Sarah, really looked at her. His gaze moved from her eyes to her hands and back again, as if measuring her, weighing risk against desperation. "A nurse," he repeated slowly. His voice was calm, but there was danger beneath it, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Yes," Sarah said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Pediatric. I know that cry." He glanced down at the baby, then back at her. "I have tried everything, bottles, pacifiers, rocking, nothing works." The frustration slipped through. Then, just for a second, cracking the armor, everyone in the cabin seemed to sense it, the tension thickening like the air before a storm. Sarah took a careful breath. The baby in his arms was red-faced and shaking with sobs. His tiny mouth opened and closed, searching blindly, his fists clenched against the dark fabric of his father's suit. "He is hungry," she said softly. "Some babies refuse artificial nipples, especially if they were breastfed early. They look for comfort, not just food." The man went very still. Something shifted in his expression, pain sharp, and sudden crossed his face before it vanished behind iron control. His jaw tightened. "His mother is dead," he said flatly. "She died giving birth." The words hit Sarah like a blow. Her throat closed, and her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She understood that pain in a way she never wanted to understand anything. "I am sorry," she whispered. The baby cried again, weaker now, exhausted. His cries sounded thin, almost fragile, and Sarah felt urgency surge through her like electricity. "There is something else," she said quietly, "something that might help." His eyes locked onto her, sharp, suspicious, dangerous. "Say it." Sarah swallowed, her heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. This was the moment, the line she could never uncross. "I am still producing," she said, her voice barely carried. "I lost my daughter 6 months ago. My body did not stop. I still have milk." The silence that followed felt absolute. Even the baby paused for half a breath, as if sensing the gravity of what she had said. "You are offering to feed my son?" the man asked, slowly testing the words, as if they might cut him. "Yes," Sarah said. Her hands trembled, but she did not pull them back. "I would never suggest this if there were another option, but he is hungry, and he is suffering, and I cannot ignore that." Around them, the cabin had gone completely quiet. Passengers pretended not to watch, but no one moved, no one breathed too loudly. The man stared at her for a long moment, calculating, weighing pride against necessity, power against helplessness. Then the baby let out another broken sob, and something inside him shattered. "The restroom," he said abruptly, standing with fluid control, despite the child in his arms more private. Sarah nodded, her legs barely holding her. As she followed him, her mind screamed that this was dangerous, insane, irreversible. But her heart answered louder. Because sometimes the most unthinkable acts were the only ones that mattered. The restroom door closed with a soft click, and suddenly the world felt smaller, quieter, heavier. The baby cried again, but the sound was muffled, now trapped in the narrow space with them, and somehow it felt more desperate, more real. Sarah stood frozen for a heartbeat, staring at the man, who filled most of the door. Up close, he was even more intimidating, his presence pressing in on her like gravity. Yet the way he held the baby was careful, almost reverent, his large hands adjusting automatically to support the tiny head. "I will wait outside," he said, after a moment, his voice rougher, now stripped of its polished edge. "Unless you need me." "I will be fine," Sarah replied, though her hands shook as she reached forward. "What is his name?" "Marco." The word left his mouth, softly, like a confession, like a prayer. Sarah took the baby, gently cradling him against her chest. The instant Marco felt the warmth of her body, his cries faltered. They did not stop yet, but they changed, becoming smaller, broken whimpers, as if hope had flickered on. Sarah swallowed hard, emotion swelling in her chest. She looked up at the man one last time. "I promise I will take care of him." For a long second, he did not move. Then he nodded once sharply and stepped back, allowing her to close the door. The moment she was alone, Sarah leaned against the wall, drawing a shaky breath. This was real. This was actually happening. Her hands moved on instinct, muscle memory, guiding her as she unbuttoned her blouse and adjusted the nursing bra beneath. Marco rooted weakly against her skin, searching, his tiny mouth open, desperate. "It is okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You are safe." For a moment, nothing happened. Marco whimpered, turning his face side to side, his frustration building. Then instinct took over. He latched. The sensation hit Sarah like a wave, warmth, pressure, the familiar pull and release that her body remembered too well. Tears streamed down her face, soundless, unstoppable. Grief and relief collided inside her chest so violently she almost cried out. Marco relaxed almost instantly. His tiny body softened, his fists unclenched, and his breathing evened out as he began to feed. The frantic desperation drained from him, replaced by quiet contentment. Sarah cradled his head, one hand stroking dark wisps of hair. She rocked gently, whispering nonsense, soothing sounds the way she had done 1,000 times before. He was not her daughter. He would never be her daughter. But he was a baby who needed her. And for the first time in months, her body was doing what it had been aching to do. Outside the restroom, Dominic Santoro stood perfectly still. His hands clenched at his sides, his bodyguard wisely keeping distance. The screaming stopped. The sudden silence was shocking, almost painful. His heart slammed against his ribs, dread and hope tangling together. Minutes passed. 10 of them. 15. When the door finally opened, Sarah stepped out slowly, Marco sleeping peacefully in her arms. His face was relaxed, his mouth slightly open, one tiny hand curled against her chest. "He is asleep," she said softly, unnecessarily. Dominic stared at his son. Truly stared. For the first time since the day Isabella died, Marco looked at peace. Not restless, not crying, not searching. Something dangerous shifted inside Dominic. Something he had buried long ago. Hope. He reached out instinctively, stopping Sarah as she moved to hand the baby back. "Your name," he said, his voice low, changed. "Sarah Mitchell." "Dominic Santoro." Their fingers brushed as he took Marco. Electricity sparked between them, sharp, unexpected. In that moment, neither of them realized it yet. But something ancient had been awakened. A bond older than fear, older than power. And there would be no walking away from it now. Sarah returned to her seat with her heart still racing, and her skin warm where the baby had rested against her chest. The cabin felt different now, quieter, but heavier, like everyone sensed that something irreversible had just happened. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look back, even though she could feel him watching her. Not staring, not judging, simply watching, as if trying to understand who she was and why she had stepped into his life without hesitation. Behind her, Dominic sat motionless, with Marco cradled against him. The baby slept deeply, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Dominic barely breathed, afraid any movement might shatter the peace he had just been given. For the first time since the flight began, the power he carried meant nothing. Money, influence, fear, none of it could buy what had just happened. A stranger had given his son comfort when he could not. And in his world, that kind of act was never without consequence. He glanced around the cabin. People avoided his eyes, but he saw the curiosity, the unease, the quiet calculations. They had heard the crying. They had felt the silence when it stopped. They would remember. Dominic shifted Marco, carefully resting his cheek against the baby's head. The warmth there grounded him. It terrified him, In his life, every kindness hit a blade. Every debt demanded payment. Yet Sarah Mitchell had asked for nothing. No favor, no promise, no protection. She had simply helped. That unsettled him more than any threat ever had. A bodyguard leaned in slightly, his voice barely audible. "Sir, should we arrange something for the woman?" Dominic's gaze sharpened. "Arrange how?" "Protection," the man replied carefully. "People noticed what happened." Dominic already knew that. He nodded once. Yes. Sarah felt the weight of that decision long before she understood it. When the plane landed, she stood quickly, grabbing her bag, eager to disappear back into anonymity. She told herself this was over, that she would go home and grieve quietly again. But as she stepped into the aisle, Dominic stood blocking her path effortlessly. Up close, the calm in his face was unsettling, like still water hiding depth. "You helped my son," he said. "You gave him peace." "I did what anyone would do," Sarah replied, though they both knew that was not true. She adjusted the strap of her bag, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt. "In my world," he continued, "everything carries a price. Every debt must be acknowledged." "I do not want anything from you," she said quickly. "I am not asking for money or favors." His eyes held her steady. "That is what worries me." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a card, and pressed it into her hand. "Call me when we land. I want to thank you properly." "That is not necessary." "It is to me." Something in his voice made her shiver, not fear, but certainty. This was not a request. It was not a threat either. It was a promise. Sarah hesitated, then nodded once. "Just dinner," she said. "Nothing more." A faint smile touched his mouth, brief, dangerous. "Just dinner," he agreed. As she walked away, she did not see the way his men were already moving quietly into position. Did not see the messages being sent. Did not hear the whispers starting to ripple outward. But Dominic did. Because in the old world he came from, a woman who fed a man's child did not walk away untouched. And Dominic Santoro never ignored a debt, especially one written in milk and silence.